There we go. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. Thanks for tuning in to another of our virtual events. And today we are delighted to have with us Jamie Harrison. And I should have established, Mindy, your last name, Mejia, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Is it Mejia? Thank God. I always blow the pronunciation live. I do it all the time. Mindy Mejia, we're delighted to have her with us as well. And Mindy's brand new book is called A World of Hurt. And I do have signed copies available. I'll put a link in the comments field. And I also have a few signed copies of To Catch a Storm. We'll also put a link to that. And Jamie Harrison, of course, author of the Jules Clement series. And they're doing, is it Counterpoint? Yeah, Counterpoint has done a really wonderful job of bringing all of Jamie's books back into print at long last. And the brand new book is called The River View, as Barbara's holding up. And this is our advanced reader copies. But we are expecting autographed copies very shortly. And I'll put a link. Is that a Russell Chatham detailed shot, Jamie? You're muted. You need to unmute yourself, Jamie. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I thought I was unmuted. It always happens. No, it's not Russell, but I used to work for Russell, so I sort of had that in mind when I asked for this time around. I asked to sort of have cover approval, and Counterpoint did a great job and let me do it.
Yeah, they're
It's
really,
That is
really
good news.
handsome.
Let me ask you a question to reveal the fact that I haven't done my homework.
That's-
Are there in fact other books by you besides the Jules Clement series, or is Jules basically it?
No, I did 2 literary novels in between. I 2 straight novels. The Widow of Nash and The Center of Everything, both with Counterpoint, which did really well. I went back. I had always wanted to go back to the mysteries, and after I did the 2 literary novels, Counterpoint agreed to put them out again, which meant that I had to write another mystery after a long, long time, right? You know that, Patrick, 20 years. So it was harder than I expected. It took longer than I expected. I thought it would be fun. It's hard work writing mysteries.
Well, it really is. And I have to say that both of you have done a terrific job. I was so moved by Mindy's book last year, the one that Patrick held up, that it was our crime book of the month, wasn't it, Mindy? Last August, in fact. I think we're right on there, To Catch a Storm. And there are not, in my view, nearly enough Midwestern mysteries. And so I'm really happy that Mindy, her territory is Iowa, currently almost underwater, but nonetheless, Iowa's had just a horrible weather siege, hasn't it? Tornadoes and floods and
Yeah, it's just a magnet for severe weather. It's it's fairly flat, so there's not a lot to break up the weather systems that come through there. And that's why it kind of felt perfect for the first book in To Catch a Storm that one of our main characters was an atmospheric physicist, because I was the perfect place to study climate and weather patterns.
well, absolutely true. My father grew up in Perry,
Mm,
and I grew up in Chicago, so I am familiar with the Midwest, and I'm happy to see that Iowa, because who else is writing Iowa? Heather Gudenkauf. Is there
yeah.
something else that you can think of, Heather? Heather's actually coming to see us again this winter and that'll be great.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Heather's the one that comes to mind.
Yay.
Just
Anyway,
to finish my spiel, Barbara,
oh,
just
sorry,
real quick.
Patrick. I just
That's
plunged in
okay.
there.
Yeah, my Lester Holt style spiel, which is just that if you have questions for Jamie or Mindy, go ahead and type them in, and Barbara will bring me back in just a little bit to ask any questions that you might have. So I'll be lurking for the meantime.
Now over to me. Well, actually, the reason I interrupted Patrick was that when he said all of your books, Jamie, I wanted to edit that to say all the Jules Clement books.
Right. Yeah. So
There were,
there's 7 books total, 5 Jules Clements now, and 1 half baked over there on my desk.
I see. Well, it's great to have you back. It's been about 6 years, hasn't it? Since it's been
It's
quite a
been
while.
For the Jules Clement, it's been longer. It's been longer, unfortunately. I put them away to do screenplay versions of them a long time ago because that paid more. And I wish I hadn't done it, but I did it. So, longer lapse than I hoped for.
Well, this is a good place to point out that writing is a business. Publishing is a business, and writing, unless you are independently wealthy, it's a job, right? And so
Right.
considerations of remuneration certainly are part of the deal, right?
Sort of back there all the time. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think sometimes fans think that, it's all rewarding, artistically and all creatively. In fact, that's the real difficulty of publishing and frankly bookselling, is an effort to marry creativity with business.
With reality.
When they're really in many ways antithetical, is a very difficult problem. I resolved it by running a not-for-profit bookstore, so I don't actually have to worry about that. But it doesn't work that way very often. So let's talk about your books. Let me ask, because I should have, if I hadn't been late to the table here, have you had a chance to read each other's books?
I got a chance to read Without a Trace, Mindy's book Without a Trace, and I'm halfway through this one, and I'm enjoying it. I wish I could write something as propulsive and as smart and as streamlined as her books. I'm enjoying it. And the two characters, the back and forth.
Right.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I have not had a chance to get a copy of your newest one. Is it out yet?
It's out next
No.
week.
A week.
We're
Okay.
we're doing this event pre-publication for sure. The only reason I asked this, I didn't know whether you wanted to talk to, interview each other, or whether I'm going to be like talking to both of you. Now we know I am going to be talking to both of you, and this is fun. So I just didn't want to squelch you if you already had a carefully prepared set of questions the whole bit, because sometimes that happens.
Barbara.
So I can read my own review of Mindy's book. Yay! I'm going to do this in reverse alphabetical order here. For the nerve-shredding sequel to Catch a Storm, which book we have already mentioned, which I thought was completely fabulous. And in fact, the paperback of it is due out on August 13th. So that's good news. And Mindy has already, it's you that has I'm trying to remember which one of you, it's your books that are in transit. It's Mindy's books.
Yeah, my books were shipped yesterday.
Yep, got it. All right. So you have shifted your focus from the psychic PI Jonah Hendrick, who I thought was a great character, to his college friend, Iowa City cop Max Summerlin, and to Kara Johnson, the lover of Kendrick's late niece. So tell us a little bit about, just briefly, Jonah, since even if he's off stage, it would be nice if people actually read To Catch a Storm along with A World of Hurt, and then about Max.
Yeah, well, originally I thought of these two books as a duet, so it was kind of a contained arc within these first two books. And I guess you could read A World of Hurt as a standalone. I've been told that it does stand up as a standalone. It's hard to tell when, you don't experience it that way as a writer. But I would recommend reading the first book first, and that is where you do meet Jonah Kendrick for the first time. He is a psychic investigator. He dreams about people who are lost, and he wakes to find them. But being a psychic comes with very severe limitations for him. It's very difficult for him to be in the world and around people. Emotions and thoughts of everyone in the room are constantly invading his head. And so he is struggling to find his missing niece in book one, and ends up having a dream about someone else who is in the last place that he dreamed about her. And it is Eve Roth's husband, Dr. Eve Roth. She is the atmospheric physicist I mentioned earlier. So the scientist and the psychic reluctantly team up to solve these two missing persons cases. Her husband is missing, his niece, and it all takes place in the middle of an ice storm over a weekend in Iowa. So that's book one. And we do meet Max Summerlin in book one. He is an Iowa City investigator assigned to the case of Eve's missing husband. He doesn't do a great job, I'll say that, in his investigation. But he comes back in book two. So he's our main character, as well as Kara Johnson in book two. And these two in book two are both recruited into a DEA task force who is trying to uncover the remains of a drug empire that we stumble into in book one. And they are just as an unlikely pairing as the scientist and the psychic. We've got a cop and a criminal in book two. And they're just as fun. They were just as fun to write.
But we'll come back to Kara, who has an interesting condition, which I have read about. And so you obviously like to write about people who have, unusual talents or, or conditions, as I said. But let's talk to Jamie here for a minute now about Jules Clement, who Blue Deer, Montana. That's such a great name. Is there an actual Blue Deer, Montana?
No. I live in Livingston, Montana, and Blue Deer is a smaller version of it. It really is kind of close. It's an odd town, a lot of sort of refugees here. It used to be a railroad town. It's in the mountains. It's right on the Yellowstone River. There are idiosyncratic people here. I get dinged sometimes for being quirky, which is a word I now completely hate, but I have to say that in a pretty place, people tend to settle here. A lot of people come from other places. And if it's a small town, you know your neighbors, you know their oddities. That's really all it is. It's right out there to be seen. Jules was trained as an archaeologist, and he came home in an effort to do good for the world, really, to be a cop. And that effort doesn't necessarily go smoothly. It's harder than he thought. His father was a police officer, was a sheriff. And in this book, in trying to sort of come back to the series, the crime that I am looking into is the murder of his father, which happened when he was a boy. It seemed like a good way to reset the whole series. Jules in this novel is about 40, and he has stopped being a sheriff because he just couldn't do it anymore. He's now being a PI, and he's back to being an archaeologist. Part of the book deals with digging up an old poor farm on the outskirts of town. So there's a lot of old crimes interwoven into a plot essentially about the person he suspects, the person who is admitted to killing his father, and that person's brother. It's a two bad brothers plot, essentially. It's a family plot.
I love the way we're labeling plots. I mean,
Well, I have, as you do when you put books out, you write essays for
right.
crime reads, for this, for that. We write about funny novels, write about this and write about that. And it was sort of appalling looking at all the tropes you try to sidestep. Do you know what I mean? It just,
I know, but some books,
Berkeley.
in the fantasy world, which is just, bursting all around. If I could, I can't find it because I've written it on a different computer. But there are actual tropes you have to include for the
Right.
fans. And I was sort of shocked to see that.
You need to in a mystery too, which was why it was actually harder to write than a literary novel. You would think it would be the other way around. I did well with those, and I thought this would be simple, but suddenly there are so many threads in a mystery. Your timing is so key. What your protagonist knows, what the reader knows, what at some points of confusion you actually remember. My whole office was a flow chart. And it was difficult, but it was fun. So it's all a puzzle box. And there are tropes.
Jamie, can I ask, did the same amount of time pass in the books that between in the time that you took a break from the series?
No.
Or is it a different timeline in the world?
No, it is. I started writing this fifth book, making Jules the age he would have been if I were still writing. When I started writing Jules, he was my age. And I started writing a version where he was 60. And frankly, I thought that this was no fun. It was no fun. I went back and I made him 40 again. And the other advantage to that, it's set in 1998. Cell phones are not really there. We haven't had September 11th yet. I just kept it in the world and tried to turn him into more of a normal 40-year-old. Speaking of tropes, most cops are lonely, alcoholic, somehow tragic. And I actually have Jules being married and the father of a 2-year-old, which adds to his fatigue. So I sort of had fun with that.
Yes, it would definitely add to his fatigue. Well, both of you have touched upon an essential, which is if you're using somebody who is not in actual law enforcement as your protagonist, you still have to have somebody in law enforcement in the picture, because a private eye or, a scientist and a psychic can't actually arrest anybody. So, it almost comes back. I'm trying to think, because Holmes and Watson isn't really a great comparison because neither of them is a cop, but they always had Lestrade, right?
Right.
In the same way that Lord Peter had his brother-in-law, and Agatha Christie. Let's see, Poirot had. I'm trying to think who it was. Was it Inspector Japp? I think it was Inspector Japp.
That sounds right.
So, even if you love the amateur sleuth, even if you love, having an archaeologist or, whatever, you still have to bring into the picture somebody who at the end was going to be able to,
get those files.
do that law enforcement thing. I don't know if either of you remember, but back in the 90s when there was this huge woman sleuth movement, do you remember it played off Marcia Muller and Sue Grafton and everybody? And that was again, that was a real trope, because every one of these female PIs either had a relative or a boyfriend or a friend who was a cop, for the same reason. And
Jules's wife is still working part-time for the sheriff's department. So half of the novel is from her point of view.
And I loved it that you have the Ab Soroka, because, Craig Johnson is, we have debuted every Craig Johnson book here at the store from the very first one. So I thought Ab Soroka County was absolutely owned by Craig. So imagine my surprise when I suddenly discovered that you have this Ab Soroka County Sheriff hiring Jules. Oh.
Since it's all fictional, Craig and I started at the same time, and Craig apparently has my career now. I shouldn't have walked away from it, but yeah, no, he does a great job. My actual county is Park County in the mountains of the Absarokas, and so I just went for it. Why not? But when I first named when I named the county, Craig was just starting too, is what I'm trying to say, just to date the series.
So pronounce it for me. I've been calling it Soroka. You call it what?
It's Absarokas. There's a town called Absaroki, but the mountains are called Absarokas. It doesn't, you pronounce it, I would try to do that too, but
I'm doing a phonetic pronunciation and you're doing the
being proper. Right? Yeah.
Got it. And in fact, it's an actual county, isn't it? In where is it?
Wyoming. Yeah.
All right. So anyway, it was fun. As I said, I had a brief, Craig Johnson moment.
Who am I reading? Yeah.
I wondered if Walt Longmire has suddenly wandered into your book.
Not yet. I'll work on it. Yeah.
Actually, Craig would probably enjoy that.
Do a crossover.
I remember meeting him early on when we were both, young and debut novelists. But he's certainly done well for himself. And I love Buffalo, where his books are set. In Wyoming.
Well,
you cross places, the fellowship. So
let's talk about landscape for a minute before we come back to Kara and her interesting medical condition. To what degree do you think that the landscape and the culture of whatever that landscape is a main character in your story? What about you, Mindy?
Yeah, I think no matter where a book is set, for me, setting is hugely important. It's almost more important than character, because it informs the characters, doesn't it? It gives them the opportunities and the constraints, that shape who they are. So where a character is born, where they live, where, that setting is really foundational for me in any book. And it was really important to me as someone who's lived in Iowa, but, not living there currently and is not from there, that I wanted to really do Iowa justice and bring it to life on the page and maybe push back a little bit against those, nothing but corn there stereotypes.
Good for you. Well, Jamie, I'm pretty sure I know what your answer is, but carry
Well,
on.
I was going to say I did like Mindy's real gritty city version of the Midwest, that realism. I grew up in the Midwest too, and I was just in Detroit for a few days, and it rings true. It really rings true. Obviously, place is useful for me, if only because it can kill people so easily. A lot of what, just to be realistic, a sheriff's department does here is try to save people from their misconceptions about the landscape. We have a lot of tourist accidents. We have
We have actually had, I'm trying to remember in the last few days, how many people have died while out hiking in Arizona.
yeah.
And people who took their children, one of them was a baby.
Uh,
And I mean, it's 117. And, it's just amazing to me how people don't adapt to, the place they are. They still dwell in whatever, landscape
no,
they're used to.
yeah, they just don't. They think I'm on vacation and I'm going to have it. And it's deadly. It's just deadly. So there's that. I don't know, the loneliness of the place sometimes, I've enjoyed doing the series in all different seasons, and they're all dramatically different. And over the years, I guess I've, drowned people. They've frozen to death and been found in snowbanks months later. That happens too. It's easy to do horrible things to people in this landscape. But
Well,
beyond that,
in both your landscapes, it's part of the landscape can kill people. It's the storm or whatever in Iowa. It's and that's why one of the reasons I think that landscape is so important in a book, aside from setting the characters and all the rest of it, you can use it as a weapon.
yeah,
Mm.
you can. I mean, gravity sucks, but it's the law. I was watching actually last night, I was looking through some of the authors who'd been on your show, and Val McDermid was on, and she said something wonderful, and it was basically if you do place well, you really take the people with you, and that means that they believe all the lies you're telling them. You convince people with place. I wish I could do her accent, but nobody can do her accent.
Oh, forget it. Nobody
Yeah.
talks like Val. And actually, her last book, she has a new one coming out with Mindy's publisher, but her last book was one of the few pandemic books in which both Edinburgh and the pandemic determined how the whole story went.
Mhm.
It was a great use of both landscape and, when I say culture, it's a pretty broad term, but that particular COVID culture, and the British had it, they were so much more severe than, well, it varied in America, obviously.
Well, Montana, what a mess.
Oh, no, I know, exactly. But there were, places in America that were as severely locked down but in her book in Edinburgh, there were some tremendous ethical questions about people, breaking the pandemic for one reason or another. So I love it. I love it when, writers make use of not just like, it wasn't the knife in the library, with whatever, but, taking what's at hand, so to speak, whatever you've decided to put into your book, and then figuring out how to mobilize it.
Proximity to Yellowstone Park is the gift that keeps giving too.
We were just there again in May, and it was, let's see, the 20-something or other. And for the very second time in May in Yellowstone, I was in a blizzard. Which for a person in Arizona is really weird. But actually, it was driving through a blizzard in Yellowstone some years ago, when it was unbelievably cold, that my husband looked at the row of keys in the car and saw a signal that looked like maybe it was heat. And it was the first time we had ever realized that we had heated seats in my car, and we could put them on, because it's never come up in Arizona.
That's very funny. Yeah.
Pretty useless feature in Arizona, huh?
So yeah, anyway, Yellowstone is indeed a gift that just keeps on giving. CJ Box has written about it brilliantly, with the jurisdictional issue, and it's such a beautiful place. And yet again, we talk about people who pay no attention. How many people, like go up to feed a bison or, or chase after a grizzly or whatever. And you just think, really?
There's an Instagram account called Turons of Yellowstone that I recommend highly.
Oh,
And
yeah.
see people doing the wrong thing there constantly. A hot springs blew up last week, and
Oh.
I do essentially dispose of a body in a hot springs in this book. I just couldn't resist. But one of them blew up, and in the video, you see people just standing there as this thing's blowing up and raining down on them and very belatedly running. So
I know, I wonder more and more if everybody thinks in a digital world that they're just watching a screen,
maybe
that none of this, it's like people go to Africa and I always remembered we were there on safari. Our guide told us about a Chinese honeymoon couple who, were in their Jeep driving along, saw elephants, stopped the car, got out to, look at the elephants and all. And one of the elephants came over and stomped them to death. I mean,
okay.
I know it's a Darwin thing. I've always sort of enjoyed the,
Darwin Awards.
Darwin Awards are among my very favorites. But yeah, so that's another example, though, disposing of a body in a convenient landscape is another, not just weaponizing the landscape, but using it for body disposal.
Yeah.
The question is, does anybody really disappear? And especially if you're an archaeologist, no, they don't usually.
Right.
But I wanted to come up with a way in which they would almost entirely. So
yeah, the hot spring does it does dissolve the body completely.
It can. It depends on the chemical makeup. There was a really unfortunate suicide years ago, and they only found his shoe, and that is the incident I used.
Wow.
Well, I was just walking on the boardwalks on the east side of the park where all of the thermal and mud things are and so forth. And this one happened on the west side near Old Faithful. So I was grateful that we were there. It didn't, but you always want, Yellowstone is actually, it's a huge volcano. James Rollins wrote one of his best thrillers ever about, the cauldron that under Yellowstone blowing up.
The volcano.
Yeah, so we're all in danger from Yellowstone. Mindy, let's go back and talk about the condition that Kara suffers from, because I think it's so interesting that you endow people with things that, while in some ways they're difficult, in other ways gives them almost like superpowers.
Right. Yeah. So we do know there's something kind of wrong or different about Kara in book one when we meet her as a side character. She's kind of a suspect initially. And it's not until this book that we find out that she actually suffers from CIP disorder. It's a congenital insensitivity to pain. So it's a real condition. It's very rare. And the people who have it, it's a genetic abnormality that kind of deforms one of a protein that's responsible for letting pain signals travel through the nervous system to the brain. And so it blocks the pain signals, so they never feel pain. Like you said, it sounds like a superpower, right? It sounds like the greatest gift, not to have to suffer from any physical pain. But it's actually very dangerous, and people who have CIP disorder usually don't live past the age of 26. It's just because you need the pain signals. Those warnings are what allows us to survive. It's what tells you to get your hand out of the fire, and stop walking on a leg that's broken. So she doesn't have that. And Max, the police investigator that she's paired with, he's in chronic pain. He's been shot twice in the line of duty, and he suffers from chronic nerve pain. So it's interesting seeing the two of them together. But at the same time, even though Kara, she doesn't have any physical pain, she is grieving in this book, from the death of her girlfriend. And so while she, CIP disorder exempts her from some forms of pain, there's layers and a lot of trauma that she's dealing with.
Well, it certainly doesn't keep you from suffering emotional pain.
Obviously not. No. And maybe that's why I wanted to give her a lot of emotional pain, because she didn't have any physical.
It almost, I mean, when I was reading about it, it's almost like somebody with that condition almost needs, like a support animal or something trained,
Mhm.
to keep nudging them when they're doing things that might, in fact, maim or kill them.
Right.
Because obviously the opportunities are there all the time.
Right. Yeah, and she hasn't exactly chosen a safe life. So it's kind of shocking that she's even made it this far.
It is. Now, she also has a romantic interest in the book, which I thought was intriguing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so in the opening scene, Kara is waking up mid-surgery in the back of an overnight veterinary clinic, which is the only doctor she's willing to go see. She's, been poked and prodded and treated as a science experiment as a kid because of the CIP disorder, and therefore, she doesn't want anything to do with doctors or hospitals. But she's found this vet who cares very little for the human race and doesn't have any interest in Kara's condition, or any interest in Kara at all, other than the money that she can get on the side from her. At least that's what we think when we first meet her. So Kara wakes up mid-surgery as Jillian is pulling a bullet from her shoulder. And Kara is not in pain, obviously. She's just kind of mildly curious about why she has anesthetic and wants to know if she's been followed to the clinic. So that's where we meet her. And even though Kara is grieving, she's Jillian's been in her life for a long time, off and on, and we see her throughout the story because Kara, she doesn't stay out of trouble, and she keeps getting injured, and so Jillian keeps popping back up. And Jillian was a really fun character to write. She's a vegan living in, America's pork capital. She runs uh, a farm sanctuary, in the middle of the state, and her work as a vet funds the sanctuary. It was a really fun setting to be able to put in the book.
You really like contrast, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, pairing up the unlikely pairings or, juxtapositions. After all, plots depend on conflict, right? So the more you can generate, the better off it is.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. The happy stories don't make for very good mysteries.
No, you could step over into romance where there are very established tropes, as I've been reading. So
Right.
what about Jules and his family?
What about well, there's the family in the past, and a lot of this has to do, his mother's still in town and he's trying to find his father's murder. His mother decides that she really wants to know exactly what happened. They know who killed him in a traffic stop, essentially, years before. The man was supposedly going home to kill his wife, and was in a hurry and shot the person who pulled him over. And so it is examining that crime, what actually happened. He has to go back into it. He doesn't want to. It doesn't help that his neighbors, he's trying to build a house at the same time. I don't know if I was trying to combine the money pit with East of Eden, but anyway, I had fun with this. He's trying to build a house at the same time. And the brother of the murderer of his father is living with the woman who lives next door. And it's intolerable to him. He's there, he hates him, it preys upon him. And he begins kind of playing with ideas of not playing the straight and not necessarily doing the right thing this time around, of trying to get rid of the man in the next house. It just drives him nuts, these neighbors. They've sued him, they've done this, they've done that, and he's just appalled when this neighbor takes in this lover. So it goes from there. There's a lot of conflict in that way. Some of it is sort of a comedy of errors, but the man next door seems to be increasingly mentally ill.
So
Yeah.
both of you in your books, make it clear that a mystery, at least a contemporary mystery, is not just about solving a crime, but it's also about the lives of the protagonists, the lives of law enforcement. There's a much more human dimension to them than if you
Yeah.
go back to the golden age when many of them were they were shorter, for one thing. One thing is really the case. Agatha Christie's ideal. I've always loved this story, and that her ideal book was 130 pages long because she wanted people, well, in the English, social structure of their day and all, she wanted people to be able to pick up her book
Mhm.
after dinner and finish it before bed because her plots were so complicated that she
Right.
was afraid people would forget it. So she wanted to write a short book. It did not work out well in publishing speak because then there were all kinds of, how signatures are made. So there was all this blank paper if the book was actually that short. So her publishers tried to make her write, longer, even
Yeah.
though she didn't want to pad it. And I do think that in that, pre-war era, going all the way back to, Conan Doyle, who after all started writing short stories for, for Sherlock Holmes, not novels, which he didn't write. I think he only wrote either 4 or 5 novels. Anyway, the focus was much more on the puzzle, on the investigation. But
Sure.
you can't really do that today for modern readers. So, as writers, you've got a twofold problem. You have to think of a credible plot, right? But you
Mhm.
also have to come up with all of this other stuff we've been talking about.
A realistic life. And, people started edging. If you think about even Josephine Tey, she started edging out of that. You get into
Mhm.
Ruth Rendell, and a lot of it is about who is her cop? Wonderful cop with a marriage. His wife was
Inspector
named
Wexford.
Nora. That's right.
Yep.
Nicholas Freeling wrote about
Those
Vanderval.
are not golden age. Those are
No, I
after.
know, but I mean, as they edged out of it, they were still
Right.
short, is the thing. They were
Yeah,
great.
you're
Yeah.
right. Well, some of Ruth's books, especially writing as Barbara Vine, just totally ran away with her.
Yeah, no,
And
you're
with
right.
the reader, but
Different thing. No,
yeah.
no, they were.
That was, I thought the Christie story was a great example of marrying creativity to a business, i.e.,
Mhm.
her design for a book ran crash into the fact that the publisher didn't want to waste paper. I've always thought that was so great. Right.
I mean, if
So,
you're going to waste paper on anyone, waste it on Agatha Christie,
well, she has apparently an immortal life, thanks to television and,
Mhm.
in the movie industry. And in point of fact, her short style is really perfect for movies.
It is.
I
Yeah.
mean, so I think that part of the reason that she's still constantly, before us in print and visually is because of her much more succinct, much more plot driven, and also in some ways it allows different people to portray the same character.
Sure. Her plots work, and there are dozens of great British actors who want to be on that new BBC series that they're doing in Italy is great. It's wonderful.
Yeah, but I mean, so all constant reinvention of Christie works on various levels.
Just fun.
And I find it fascinating in a way that Sayers, Lord Peter and Harriet don't. It's much harder to
Sure.
turn them into film. Although I have to say that the 2 series that British television did for the Peter Wimseys are extraordinary. The first one with Ian Carmichael, and the
Mhm.
second one, just the 3 Harry. They never did do the 4th one with Edward Petheridge. I thought were just
Mhm.
brilliant.
I saw
Very,
that.
very different.
Yeah.
In case any of you ever want to watch them, I think they exist on BritBox or Acorn or someplace or other. But it's fun to watch the Ian Carmichael and then watch the Edward Petheridge and see how different people, dive
Sure.
into Sayers. Well, we digress as we always do. So, Mindy, let me wind up here before Patrick comes on. What is it you're working on? Because we know, we of us in the business, that you finished this book a long time ago because it takes so long to get to publication. So clearly you've had time to think about your next work while you were waiting for this one to publish.
I have, yes. Yeah, I'm actually most of the way through book 3 in the series. So the Iowa Mystery series is going to continue for 2 more books. So I've got working on book 3. Hopefully that one will be out next year.
Which means that she has a contract that she's being paid for by her publisher for up to 4 books, which I love.
Grove is a great publisher. They're great.
They are. It's a fantastic home. I'm so happy there.
Yeah.
They are a smaller publisher. They are allied with publisher in the UK. They generally have lots of awards. I think they have a book up for the Booker Prize, or maybe even more than one. I think the Booker Prize nominee, or what they call the long list, which we call, the nominees.
Well,
came
they
out.
have a sympathizer and they have Val McDermott. So they've got,
Right.
yeah,
They
right.
definitely do. Plus they have Donna Leon.
Yeah.
Ta-da. Okay. Donna and I have been friends for her entire career, and I do her book launches. I just did one. Do her book launches every year. She's in Europe and I'm here, and we talk, and it's one of the treats of my years to have a chance to spend an hour with Donna. We hardly ever talk about her books. We talk about music and opera and, what's wrong with Venice today and all this other stuff. It's great. So, Jamie, what about you? Now that you've come back, are you going to be writing something different?
I'm halfway through a Jules mystery called Blue Ghosts.
Oh, wonderful.
And I'm
Some
enjoying
Blue
it.
Deer?
Set in Blue Deer, and it's about an old friend of his and theft. It's about an old family in town. I actually have been working a lot on safe deposit boxes and thievery and having fun with it. Sort of a little bit of a locked room thing in the middle of it.
I'm so
And
glad you said you've been having fun, and I
I'm
hope.
having fun right now. Wait till the edit, but
Okay. Well, I do think that joy is, is important to
Mhm.
writers. If you don't feel joy in what you're doing, then it's going to show up in the book. In fact, I read something yesterday that really caught me by surprise, and I've been applying it ever since, which basically was saying that whatever expression is on your face when you answer the phone tends to be the whole flavor of the conversation.
Oh.
I thought about that. I'm impatient when when I answer the phone or whatever. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna take a
Watch
breath
that.
here, get it, set yourself here, have a smile, then answer the phone. It will be completely different. All
Yeah.
right, Patrick, come and join us. I'm sure there's many things you could contribute to this somewhat disjointed conversation.
I don't know about that. I've been enjoying listening to it though. Um, all right, Jamie. So I have to say, huge fan of your dad's. And I know that you probably get just bombarded with questions about him. But
Okay.
I'm interested in what was it like growing up the child of Jim Harris?
Um, well, I didn't think that writing was a good career choice. How's that? But that's simply because he didn't make money until I was about 20. He didn't make a living doing it. What was it like? It was wonderful. I read a lot. It was pretty great. My parents were very young when they had me, and it was just a house full of books and food and a wonderful mind.
Yeah, I have a distinct memory. I got to see him read a couple times over the years. He had a place down in Patagonia
Yes, I
for a
miss
long, long
it.
time. And I just remember him reading it at someplace in Tucson, holding forth. He seemed like he was kind of a walking, he came out of another era. He'd be the cigarette and a glass of wine, in the middle of the bookstore. you know.
Yep.
Uh, uh, yeah, he was just great.
You'll be
Well,
happy
they
to-
let him do it for sure. He was a poet essentially. And it wasn't that he was a showman, but he was so comfortable in his own skin that yes, the cigarette, the wine, the whole bit, and the whole appetite. He read more than anybody I've ever known, and he could call it all up in a second.
Mm.
So
Right. Any of his work, do you have favorites of his books, or did you read his books?
I did. I actually got to make comments on Dalva years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I did. And I love Dalva. I love Farmer. I love Legends. This is why, Mindy, I know the people at Grove because that was his publisher. And we
Oh, I didn't know
put
that.
out a couple of collections of nonfiction since he died. And it's been great working on that. And kind of
Mindy, who are your literary heroes, so to speak? Not everybody has a dad who was a fabulous writer. So what is your experience?
You know, I grew up reading a John Steinbeck. Well, you know, he that was one of my favorites as growing up. Probably middle like there wasn't middle grade fiction when I was in middle grade, so I remember reading John Steinbeck. And I'd say my probably my favorite book. You know, when book clubs ask you to pick one, which is like impossible, I'll always say "Love in the Time of Cholera" by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Because it
Nice.
has a perfect ending. It's so hard to nail endings, and it's just perfect.
Yeah. Perfect novel.
Hmm.
If you is there a thriller writer, mystery writer who you really don't have in mind, but who you just think does it perfectly? I mean, if you had to pick a couple whose career you wanted or who you wished you'd written one of their novels, who would it be?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Megan Abbott. You know, I love her books. I just gobble up her books. So she's definitely a hero in the genre for me. I really admire her. I'm always, you know, secretly hoping that one day we'll be friends. So Megan, if you're out there, you know,
Right.
just give me a call. How about you, Jamie, in mystery?
In mysteries, nobody, I guess Kate Atkinson in a weird way, those Jackson
Hmm.
Brody novels. I love them.
There's a new one. There's a new one
Yes,
publishing here
yes.
in September.
I can't wait. Because she had, I guess because she wrote them, started them right after my first book came out, but I loved her humor. I loved the fact that she too tried to treat an event like a Rube Goldberg kind of game. One thing happens, another thing happens, and gradually everything falls apart. And you're watching these people kind of limp through a sort of deadly comedy of manners sort of thing. She's very good at that. And you can do it for humor like Carl Hyacin, or you can mix it like Kate Atkinson. But I really, really like her writing. But I mean, yeah, I love Marquez. My God. Yeah.
Well, Patrick, that was a big question. What next?
Anything else?
Well,
I wish I'd seen you in Patagonia. That was a beautiful town, beautiful place.
yeah, yeah. I really loved that memoir that he did kind of, I think when he turned 60, called Off to the Side.
It's full of
Uh,
lies.
Full of lies. I imagine that there were a lot of tall tales in there,
Yeah.
but no, just about Montana in general. Livingston, was that Madman Peter Bowen from there?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
The late
Barbara and I both
Peter.
knew Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
but he wrote
character.
some really brilliant and completely off the, just off the grid mysteries that I really loved. I really loved them. And he was impossible to work with.
He was. We also saw a lot of Jim Crumley, who last good
Another
guess. Yeah.
another wild
Yeah.
man, right?
Wild man.
Patrick actually did an event for Jim Crumley at the store. See, Mindy,
Hmm.
you're handicapped in this because there's you and
Montana.
yeah, it's just like we have to find, well, actually, all right, of Midwestern writers, let's say, is there anybody that you find really outstanding?
Oh my God. I mean, William Kent Kruger.
Oh, yes, I know. I was just going to say that.
Of course, of course. Yeah, I love Ken's books. And he's got Spirit Crossing coming in a couple of weeks, I think, end of
He's going to be
August.
here. He's going to be here with it on August 20th. We have again been lucky that every single book he's ever written, including during COVID when he came anyway, and we did our streaming from the back of the bookstore, just Kent and Patrick and me.
Oh, nice.
This is Arizona, so we didn't actually have to close. The staff could come to work. No, he's a marvelous writer and really has evolved. Do you know that John Sanford writes a bunch of books that one of them is set at the Iowa State Fair, and many of them are in Minnesota and Mississippi adjacent.
Yeah,
Or
he's got
were.
a lot in Minnesota. I didn't know about the one in the Iowa State Fair. I'll have to look for that one.
Yeah, it's a Lucas. Davenport, really. Trying to think, Patrick, who else can we think of that is a David Ellis writes about Chicago, but those are really urban.
Years
Mhm.
ago, John Jackson wrote some great books about
Alex
Detroit.
Kava writes about Nebraska. She publishes independently now, but she wrote a ton of books set in Nebraska. Has written, still writing
John
for her.
Jackson was so great, and he's really neglected now.
Yeah.
He wrote the Detroit set. What was his
Blind
character's name? Fang
Bang
Mulheisen.
Mulheisen, something like that. Mole,
He wrote a great book about Butte, Montana, too.
Go by Go.
Go by Go,
Yes,
right.
CJ actually wrote a terrific book about Butte, called, I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's in many ways my favorite CJ box. No offense to Joe Pickett. And Lauren Estelman has written loads of books about Detroit.
Mhm. That's right.
So,
That's right.
again,
And Elmore Leonard. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, duh. Sorry.
right.
Who was that? Barbara, remember Harold Adams, who
I
Yeah.
wrote
do.
those
And you remember Les
really?
Roberts and his marvelous books about Cleveland? Actually, here's I took was it last summer? Yeah, last summer. We the cruise line we'd signed up to go to Japan. Rob turned out couldn't go to Japan. Or no, we had signed up to go from Moscow to St. Petersburg, and that appeared unwise. So instead, they offered us another trip. And when I looked at all their offerings, the Great Lakes was the one that really got to me. And I thought, I grew up in Chicago and I have driven around Lake Michigan, but I have never thought about cruising the Great Lakes. I'd never been to Cleveland. I had once been to Detroit, but only in the airport on my way somewhere else. So anyway, we signed up and it turned out to be absolutely brilliant. And indeed, we stopped in Detroit and Cincinnati. It was great to see the rebirth of Detroit, as well as some of the old things. But, there's an example like the East End of London, where something sort of like wiped out big parts of the city. And while that was terrible, it also created an opportunity, to reinvent it, restructure it, regrow it. And you
Yeah.
could really see all that energy in Detroit and all this new stuff coming. It was marvelous.
That's where
Anyway,
Megan Abbott comes from, by the way. Did you know that, Mindy?
Detroit?
I think so. Yeah, if I'm
I
not
did not know
mistaken.
that.
isn't her
Originally.
last book, Patrick, isn't it in Michigan?
Is that in Michigan? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I
So
think
if
she
you
was.
if you pay attention, Mindy, Megan is frequently here.
Oh,
So next time she's going to be here, you
I'll have
could
to pop in.
coming to visit.
There you go.
She's really cool and approachable and
Yeah.
like one of the smartest people we know.
Yeah. We had a marvelous time with her for that book. She was here, it was last
Yeah.
June, wasn't it?
With the
Happy to
Olympics on
introduce
right
you.
now. With the Olympics on right now, I just keep thinking about the gymnast one she wrote. You Will Remember Me, about the gymnastics family. That's just running through my head this week.
As a writer, you could hardly ever have made up the Simone Biles story. I mean, you just really would have been hard pressed as a writer to even create it and expect anybody to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And not just her. I mean, there are plenty of other people in the same position. That one's on my mind because we watched it last night. And then we detoured over to Tahiti to watch the surfing. And I put up a post today on Instagram because we were there at the start of the Olympic Village in Tahiti in April of 2022. And I took a picture. All there was a bridge with 5 Olympic rings on it and trees. That's all. Right. So I was impressed. In fact, Patrick, it really explains T. Jefferson Parker's last book, The Surfer Thriller. If you watch those guys in those waves off Western Tahiti, wow.
It's impressive.
I know. Now we completely digressed. I have completely
Well, we were
digressed.
talking about settings killing you, so I think we've circled back around.
There you go.
You mean there was an internal logic to this whole
Yes,
discussion?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Right. Patrick, is there anything else that comes to mind?
Well, I'll be self-indulgent and name another Montana writer that I dearly love, and that's James Welch.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
he doesn't get enough attention now.
No, he's the greatest novelist out of the state, period.
Yeah,
I think.
incredible.
Fool's
Yeah.
Crow.
We did the death of Jim Loney for our noir and hard-boiled discussion group, and it fit in just perfectly,
I'm sure it did. His
Yeah.
wife Lois is still alive and she's a good
She's
friend.
still kicking? Okay.
She's kicking. I'll see her when I go up to Missoula to do a signing. She's a lovely woman, and I keep hoping that more attention comes to Jim's work and the Indian lawyer. And but Fool's Crow especially. I know that some people are trying to maybe develop it for a movie or an HBO style series. It wouldn't be easy, but it would definitely be worth it and long overdue.
Sounds
Right.
wonderful. Well, in the absence of any other comments, let me remind you that we have autographed copies on their way. The Riverview by Jamie Harrison, and in the store, we have A World of Hurt by Mindy Mejia. Probably we're not really allowed to sell it till August 6th, but we take an elastic view as long as we have our hands on them. I know. Shh. No. Anyway, what a pleasure. I thought it would be fun to pair the two of you up, and it's turned out extremely well. So thank you very much for being kind enough to agree to that. And I want to thank everybody who's watched us tonight. I will send you both the links to the videos and also to the podcast as soon as it is created. And then you can put them up on your social media, and it's a
Thank
forever
you.
book tour.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Patrick. And it's nice meeting you, Mindy.
Yes, thank you both so much. This was such a treat. Thank you.
It was a pleasure for all of us. Thanks so much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.